Hello again. Hope you're doing well. I'm Hardleg Joe, if you didn't know, and today I'd like to talk to you about Maxx and why it is objectively bad for the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's start by talking about some basic game design fundamentals. Why does Yu-Gi-Oh! Have a ban list in the first place? It's to prevent the game from getting stale. Because in any game, there is usually a best strategy, a meta, if you will. In fact, the word meta started as an acronym. It stands for Most Effective Tactic Available. And if a game has an established meta, if everyone knows what the most effective tactic is, what the best cards to play are, then it can start to get boring. Because everyone's just going to play whatever the best cards are, at least if they want to win. At that point, deck building is no longer a factor in victory. All that matters is player skill and luck. And let's be clear, while playing Yu-Gi-Oh! At the top levels does take a lot of skill, there's a cap on how skillful one person can be. Once you understand every card in your deck and how it interacts with every other card you could possibly encounter, you've reached the maximum level of skill. There's no more you can learn about the cards and their interactions. And the longer we have to play with the same cards, the more players are going to reach that level of skill. And at that point, the only factor left is luck. If two duelists have nearly the same deck and the same level of skill, then the winner is going to be whoever happens to draw the best cards off the top of their deck. Which is objectively bad for the game. The whole point of games, as a medium, is player interaction and choice. So if a game is determined by a coin flip, and the player interactions don't matter, then it has failed to be a game. Period. This isn't a matter of opinion. If a game becomes deterministic, then it is boring to play, and even more boring to watch. Which means people stop paying attention to it, and the game dies. This is why we have a ban list, to keep us from getting to that point. The ban list is a tool to keep the game interesting so that it stays alive. Every few months, Konami bans the most effective tactic available, so that players can search for new tactics and begin working on the skills needed to effectively use those tactics. This, along with new card releases, is what allows people to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And enjoy it. It's what keeps it interesting. Now we bring in Maxx. In the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! It was quickly discovered that the most effective tactic for every deck is to draw cards. Cards are the only resource in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's no mana, no energy system restricting what you can do. You are only limited to the cards that you have access to, the things in the hand, field, and graveyard. Cards are power in Yu-Gi-Oh! So anything that lets you draw more cards or put more cards into play is going to be inherently powerful. That's why Pot of Greed is banned. It's not the most overpowered card in the game, but it lets you draw two with no limits or restrictions. It's always good. So no matter what deck you're building, including Pot of Greed is always going to be the most effective tactic available. That's the point I want to make here. It's not forbidden for being broken. It's forbidden because if it wasn't, then it would become a mandatory part of every competitive deck. And as a result, the game would get more stale, more predictable, more easily solved. Perhaps more importantly though, because it's powerful enough, because it's always good no matter when you draw it, high-level games with identical decks and equal skill would always be decided by whoever happened to draw Pot of Greed. Maxx is the same way. It's often framed as if Maxx only hurts combo decks. But even if your deck just summons twice, Maxx C is Pot of Greed. The truth is, it hurts every deck that special summons, which is essentially every deck in the game, with only a small handful of exceptions. Even Eldritch special summons their trap monsters. Even Monarchs special summon their squires. Maxx C may not get as many cards from control decks, but they still get enough to make it worth running, especially when it's going to draw 3, 4, 10 cards against every other deck in the format. Maxx C is the most effective tactic available. As long as it is legal, there is no reason to ever run it at less than 3. Which would be bad enough on its own, but there's actually a bigger problem associated with this. Because you see, Maxx C does have some counterplay. You can stop it with Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, a card that not only negates Maxx C, but is useful against a variety of other popular cards as well. But all that means is that Ash Blossom is also the most effective tactic, a mandatory 3 of in every single deck. Which isn't always the case. Ash is a powerful card, but its usefulness is usually dependent on the meta. In some formats, it's not very good and doesn't see much play. But because Maxx C is good for every format, so is Ash. The exact same argument can be used for Called by the Grave. It's more powerful than Ash, more useful in more formats, but as long as Maxx C and Ash are both mandatory, then so is Called by the Grave, because it stops both of them. All of this means that nearly every competitive deck in Master Duel must start with the same 8 cards. 3 Maxx C, 3 Ash Blossom, and 2 Called by the Grave. Nearly a fourth of every 40-card deck is taken up by the exact same 3 staples, which makes every duel feel more or less the same. There is no reason to not play these ratios if you can, and because these cards are so powerful, a significant number of games are decided not by deck building or skill, but by who happens to draw these powerful cards. Many games are decided entirely by luck, and after 8 months of playing the format, that fact has become obvious. It does not matter what deck my opponent is playing. If I can activate and resolve Maxx C, I am winning 9 times out of 10, because they are either going to end their turn without a board and let me OTK them, or they're going to give me so many cards that I can't possibly lose, no matter what they build. There are exceptions, of course. I've taken the Maxx C challenge and won. I've activated and lost. But those are the exception, not the rule. Most of the time, these 3 cards determine games, which means we must play them, which means the game is stale, which is objectively bad for everyone. #ban Maxx C.